The porch light was on, but the door stayed shut. I stood there on the front step of my own son's house in Oakville, holding a tin of the butter tarts my mother used to make every Thanksgiving, and I watched the curtain in the dining room shift by half an inch. Someone was inside. Someone had seen me, and that someone was deciding, in that small, suspended moment, not to come to the door. I pressed the bell a second time. I could hear it chime faintly through the wood. Inside, I heard a child laugh, then the clean clink of a wine glass, then a voice that was my daughter-in-law's saying something I could not quite make out, but that ended with a sound like a lid being put back on a pot. I stood there for another minute. The November wind coming off Lake Ontario cut straight through the wool of my coat, and my knuckles turned pink around the tin. I had driven 43 minutes from my house in Burlington to bring those tarts. I had baked them at 5 in the morning because I wanted the butter to set properly before the drive. I had even tied a bit of twine around the tin because my granddaughter Hazel liked untying things. And now my son's front door was closed, and my son's front door was going to stay closed. I walked back to my car. I sat down behind the wheel. I set the tin of tarts on the passenger seat like a small passenger of its own, and I did not cry, because at 68, I have learned that crying in parked cars is a younger woman's luxury. Instead, I started the engine, backed carefully down the long paved driveway that I had paid to have resurfaced 2 summers ago, and I drove home. That was the night I began to understand what had happened to my life. My name is Joan. I was born in a small town outside Kingston, Ontario, the daughter of a mill foreman and a woman who could stretch a pound of ground beef across 4 days of suppers. I trained as a registered nurse at St. Michael's in Toronto in 1977. I met my husband George at a curling bonspiel in Scarborough when I was 24, and we were married for 41 years before the stroke took him on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of the CBC News. George left me comfortable. He had been a structural engineer with a good pension from his firm. We had paid off our house decades ago, and between his life insurance and the sale of his parents' cottage on Lake Simcoe, I had more than I would ever need. He had one son, Marcus. He was 43. He worked in commercial real estate in Mississauga, and when he was 8 years old, he used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms and tell me that when he grew up, he was going to buy me a house with a yellow door, because yellow doors were the happiest. He had not said anything like that in a very long time. Marcus was married to Priya. Priya was a pharmacist, originally from Brampton, and for the first few years of their marriage, I had genuinely loved her. She laughed easily. She sent me photographs of their cat. She called me on my birthday without being reminded. Somewhere along the way, something in her had hardened, and I had not noticed it happening until I was already on the wrong side of it. And there was Hazel, 7 years old. Red hair like her grandfather, a gap between her 2 front teeth, and a habit of drawing octopuses on every piece of paper she could find. She was, without any embarrassment or exaggeration, the best thing in my life. When George died, I was 59, and the grief nearly drowned me. I sat in our kitchen for 3 weeks, eating crackers and drinking tea and watching the bird feeder. And during those weeks, the only person who called every single day was Marcus. He drove down from Oakville. He fixed the Eva Struffs. He sat beside me, and we did not have to talk. And in the dim, grateful way of a woman who had just lost the center of her world, I decided without ever quite saying it out loud that I was going to spend the rest of my life being useful to my son's family. That decision cost me everything, and I did not realize it until 5 years later, standing on a cold porch with a tin of butter tarts. In the beginning, it was small things. Marcus and Priya had just bought the house in Oakville, and they were stretched. I paid the land transfer tax. I paid for the new furnace when the old one gave out in January. I paid for Hazel's preschool, so Priya could go back to work. These were things a grandmother does. These were things my own mother had done for me when Marcus was a baby, and George and I were scraping by in a 1-bedroom apartment near High Park. Then it became bigger things. The trip to Disney World that Priya said Hazel absolutely had to have before she was old enough to lose the magic. The renovation of their kitchen because the previous owners had chosen, in Priya's words, a color scheme that made her sad every morning. The leased SUV because Priya did not feel safe driving Hazel in the old Honda. I paid for all of it, and it never occurred to me to say no, because every check I wrote felt like another small act of love, another way of staying connected, another way of being someone my son still needed. And then, somewhere in the 4th year, the checks stopped being requested and started being assumed. I began to notice that Marcus only called me when there was an expense coming. I began to notice that Priya introduced me to her book club friends as George's mother rather than as Joan. I began to notice that when I suggested visits, there was always something in the way. A ballet class, a work deadline, a renovation. I noticed, but I did not act, because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I asked the question, the answer would break me. The thing that finally made me ask the question was a piece of mail. It arrived on a Tuesday in early November, a plain envelope from my bank. I had banking with the Royal Bank, same as George had, same as my father had before him. Inside was a printed summary of my pre-authorized payments, sent once a year as part of some new consumer protection rule. I almost threw it out. I actually had it in my hand over the recycling bin, but something made me sit down at the kitchen table with my tea and open it and read. There were 96 automatic payments leaving my account every month. 96. I read the list twice. Then I got out a pen and I began to cross things off. My own mortgage, paid off for 11 years. 2. My utilities in Burlington. 4. My car insurance. 1. That accounted for 7. The other 89 were Marcus and Priya, their mortgage, their second mortgage, which I had not known they had taken out, their property taxes, their home insurance, their car leases, both of them, their auto insurance, their cell phones, all 3, their internet, their streaming services, 6 of them, their gym memberships, Priya's Pilates studio, Hazel's private school tuition, which I had not known she had been transferred to, Hazel's ballet, her swimming, her French immersion tutor, her riding lessons, a lawn care company in Oakville, a cleaning service twice a week, a landscaper, a pool service, even though I had not known they had put in a pool, their Costco membership, their wine club, Priya's monthly subscription to some sort of curated clothing box, Marcus's golf club dues at a course in Mississauga I had never been invited to. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time. The tea went cold. The afternoon light moved across the floor and up the side of the fridge. At some point, I stood up and went to the window and looked out at the maple tree George had planted the year Marcus was born. When had my help stopped being help, I thought. When had my love become a subscription service? I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I simply went to my desk and I took out a lined pad and I began to do a thing I had not done in years. I added up what I was spending every month on the lives of 2 adult professionals who had never once said thank you. The number was $11,460. Every month. I sat back in my chair. That was more than most Canadians earned in a month. That was more than my father had earned in a year. I was $72,000 a year poorer than I should have been, every single year, because I had been paying for a life I had not been invited into. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark beside George's empty side of the bed, and I thought about my granddaughter Hazel. I thought about how the last time I had been to their house, 6 months ago, Hazel had hugged me at the door, and Priya had said, a little too brightly, "Hazel, come inside now. Grandma has to get home before dark." It had been 2 in the afternoon. I had been being managed, ushered out, kept at a distance that was just close enough to keep the checks coming, and I had let it happen because I had been so afraid of being alone that I had paid for the privilege of pretending I wasn't. The next morning I called my sister Eleanor. Eleanor is 2 years older than me. She lives in Peterborough, and she has been telling me to set limits for 4 years. When I told her about the 96 payments, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, very gently, "Joni, I think it's time you had lunch with Marcus." So I invited him to lunch. I picked a restaurant in Oakville, close to his office, somewhere he could not claim he was too busy. I said I wanted to talk about something important. He texted back, "Sure. Is everything okay with your health?" And I told him it was. He was 10 minutes late. He came in wearing a coat I had paid for, holding a phone on a plan I was paying for, and he sat down across from me and did not take off his scarf. He ordered a bowl of soup. He kept looking at his watch. I asked him how Priya was. I asked him how Hazel was. He answered in the short, impatient way of a man who wants to skip to the part where he finds out what is being asked of him. So I stopped making small talk. I said, "Marcus, I received my annual summary from the bank. I have 96 pre-authorized payments. 89 of them are for your household." He set down his spoon. His face did a thing I had never seen it do before. It did not register surprise. It registered calculation. "Mom," he said, "I hope you're not about to make this weird." I looked at him. This was my son. This was the boy who had wanted to buy me a house with a yellow door. "I am not making anything weird," I said. "I am asking you about it." He sighed. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He said, "Priya and I have talked about this, actually. We think you should maybe, live a little less comfortably. You're retired. You have that big house in Burlington for just you. You go out for lunch. You have your little trips. Maybe it's time to scale back." There was a moment of absolute silence at the table. Around us, I could hear someone's fork hit a plate. I could hear a woman laugh at the next table. I could hear my own heart in my ears. "Live less comfortably," I repeated. "I just mean," he said, "you have choices, Mom. And honestly, Priya and we're in a stage of life where we can't really cut back. Hazel's education, the house, our lifestyle. It's locked in. You're at a stage where you have flexibility." I watched my son's mouth say those words. I watched him not understand what he had just done. "Marcus," I said, very slowly, "are you aware how much of your lifestyle I pay for?" He looked at his soup. "Some things, yeah. $11,460 a month," I said. He did not answer. "That is what I pay. Every month. For your house, for your cars, for your daughter's school, for your wine club, for your pool service. I did not know you had a pool, Marcus." His jaw tightened, and then he said the thing that finished it. He said, "Mom, it's not a big deal for you. It's a big deal for us." I placed my napkin on the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I said, "I will pay for this lunch. You should get back to work." I drove home to Burlington. I did not listen to the radio. I did not stop for gas even though I needed to. I went straight to my kitchen table, and I took out that annual summary, and I took out a fresh pad of paper, and I began to make a plan. The next morning, a Wednesday, I drove to the Royal Bank branch on Brant Street where I had banked for 30 years. I asked to see a personal banker. A young woman named Chantal sat me down in a glass office, and I slid the annual summary across her desk. "I would like," I said, "to cancel every pre-authorized payment on this list, except for the ones in my own name. I would also like to change the password on my online banking, close my joint credit card with my son, and open a new checking account that only I have access to." Chantal looked at the list. Chantal looked at me. Chantal, to her credit, did not flinch. "All of these?" she said. "All 89, I said. "May I ask," she said carefully, "if there's a reason?" Sometimes in these situations we recommend speaking with the other parties first. "I have spoken," I said. "He told me to live less comfortably." Chantal's mouth did a small, tight thing that I suspect was a smile trying not to happen. She said, "All right, Mrs. Kavanaugh, let's go through this one at a time." We spent 3 hours. By the time I walked out of that bank, the air was colder and the sky was lower, and every automatic payment tying my life to my son's life was gone. I also did 2 other things that week. I called my lawyer, a woman named Helen, who had handled George's estate. I asked her to draft a new will. My old will had left everything to Marcus, with a small trust for Hazel. The new one left the house, the investments, George's pension residual, and the cottage money in a structured trust for Hazel, to be administered by Eleanor and released to Hazel, at 25 for education, at 30 for a home, and fully at 35. Marcus was not in the new will at all. Helen looked at me over her reading glasses. "Joan," she said, "are you sure?" "I have been sure for a week," I said. I just needed to say it out loud. The third thing I did was I asked my own doctor for a full cognitive assessment. I had been reading. I knew how this went. I knew that when adult children find out their mother has cut them off financially and disinherited them, one of the first things they reach for is the suggestion that she must not be in her right mind. I wanted that door locked before anyone tried to open it. My doctor, a kind man named Dr. Basu, gave me the assessment. I scored in the top range for my age. He gave me a signed, dated letter. I put it in my safety deposit box. Then I went home, and I waited. It took 4 days. The first call came on a Sunday morning. It was Marcus, and his voice was the voice of a man who had just discovered that the tap had been turned off. "Mom," he said. "Mom, something's wrong with your bank. The mortgage payment bounced. The school called me. They said Hazel's tuition is overdue. What happened?" I took a breath. "Nothing is wrong with my bank, Marcus." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I canceled the payments," I said. "All of them." The silence on the line was a living thing. I could feel him holding the phone too tight. I could feel him trying to arrange his face into whichever expression was going to get him what he needed. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Mom, why would you do that? Why would you do that without talking to me?" "I did talk to you," I said. "At lunch. You told me to live less comfortably. I have decided to take your advice. I have decided that it is not comfortable for me to pay for a life I am not part of. Mom, this is insane. We can't absorb all this at once. The mortgage alone, Mom. The second mortgage. The cars. We'll lose everything. Then you'll have to make some choices, Marcus," I said. "You'll have to live less comfortably." He shouted at me. He called me cruel. He called me manipulative. He said I was punishing him for one bad sentence at a lunch. He said Priya was going to be devastated. He said Hazel was going to have to leave her school. I let him shout, and when he was done, I said, "I have to go now, Marcus. I love you. But I am finished funding a family that does not want me in the room." And I hung up. The phone rang 11 more times that afternoon. I did not answer. At 6 in the evening, the doorbell rang. I looked out through the living room window, and I saw Marcus and Priya on my front porch in matching anxious faces. Priya was holding Hazel's hand. Hazel was in her little purple coat, and her cheeks were red from the cold, and she was looking up at the door with an expression I have thought about every day since. I opened the door. I did not step aside. I stood in the doorway, just as I had been made to stand in theirs, and I held the frame with one hand. "Hazel," I said. "My love, would you like to go into the kitchen? I made butter tarts. They are in the tin on the counter. Take as many as you like." Hazel nodded, let go of her mother's hand, and ducked under my arm into the house. Then I looked at my son and his wife. "I did not invite you in," I said quietly. "Say what you came to say from where you are standing." Priya's face did something complicated. She was a woman who had spent 5 years being in charge of how our interactions went. She was not used to being on the cold side of the door. "Joan," she began, "this is a huge misunderstanding." "Priya," I said, "I worked in a hospital for 36 years. I know what a misunderstanding looks like. This is not one." Marcus stepped forward. "Mom, please, can we just come in and talk? We have Hazel with us. Please." I understood then why they had brought her. They had brought her because they thought she was currency. They thought the sight of my granddaughter on my porch in the cold would break me open and send me running for the checkbook. They had miscalculated. You brought a 7-year-old out in -4 weather to use as leverage against her grandmother, I said. That is something I want you both to think about for a long time. Priya's mouth opened and closed. Here is what is going to happen, I said. Hazel is going to eat a butter tart. Then I am going to drive her home because she should not be in this conversation. When I come back, you will be gone from my porch. And tomorrow, we are going to speak, on the phone, once, and I am going to tell you exactly what I am and am not willing to do going forward. Do you understand? Marcus looked like a child. For a moment, I could see the boy who had wanted the yellow door. Then the moment passed, and he was my 43-year-old son again, and he said, Mom, you are going to ruin our lives. No, I said. I am going to stop paying for them. Those are different things. I closed the door. In the kitchen, Hazel was sitting at the table with a butter tart in each hand. I sat down across from her. She looked at me with her serious 7-year-old eyes, and she said, Grandma, are you mad at Mummy and Daddy? I thought for a long time before I answered. I am not mad, sweetheart, I said. I am tired. There is a difference. And when grown-ups are tired for a long time, sometimes they have to make big changes so they can rest. Hazel nodded. Because 7-year-olds understand tiredness better than most adults give them credit for. Then she said, Can I still come see you? Even if Mummy is mad. I reached across the table, and I took her small, sticky hand. Hazel, I said, you can always come see me. Always. Do you hear me? No matter what anyone says, you can call me from any phone in the world, and I will come get you. That is a promise. She nodded again, very serious, and then she said, Okay, can I have a third tart? I drove her home. I did not speak to Marcus or Priya when I dropped her off. I simply walked her to the door, kissed the top of her head, and waited until she was inside before I turned and walked back to my car. The phone call the next day was brief. I told them that I would no longer be paying any of their bills. I told them that I would continue to put money aside for Hazel, directly into a trust, and that Priya and Marcus would have no access to it. I told them that if they wanted a relationship with me, it would be built on visits and phone calls and kindness, not on transactions. I told them that I had changed my will and that I had a letter from my doctor in case they were thinking of taking the obvious next step. I told them I loved them and that I hoped, in time, they would understand. Priya cried. It was, I think, the first real crying I had ever heard from her. I could not tell if it was grief or rage. Perhaps it was both. Marcus said nothing at all. In the weeks that followed, things got worse before they got better. The second mortgage defaulted. They had to sell one of the cars. Hazel was pulled from the private school and enrolled in the very good public school 3 blocks from their house, which she liked considerably more, according to the voice notes she began sending me from her mother's phone. The pool was drained. The landscaper stopped coming. Priya posted things on social media that, according to Eleanor, who kept a closer eye on those things than I did, made her look small. Marcus did not call for almost 2 months. And then, on a Saturday afternoon in late January, he did. He did not ask for money. That was the first thing I noticed. He asked if he could come over, alone. He arrived in a coat I had not bought him, driving a smaller car than before. He sat at my kitchen table, and for the first 10 minutes, he did not say anything. Then he said, Mom, I don't know who I became. I did not answer. I let the silence do the work. I looked at our budget last week, he said. Really looked at it. We were spending $160,000 a year beyond what we were earning. On nothing. On Pilates and pool chemicals. And you were paying for it. And I let you. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand, the same way he had when he was a little boy. I don't expect you to put me back in the will, he said. I don't even know if I'm asking for that. I think I'm asking if I can come for Sunday suppers again. I think I'm asking if Hazel can still see her grandmother. I think I'm asking if there's a way back. I looked at him across the table. I thought about 43 years of him. I thought about the porch in Oakville and the curtain moving half an inch. I thought about the tin of butter tarts on my passenger seat. Marcus, I said, there is a way back, but it does not go through my wallet. It goes through the front door, and the front door opens both ways. Do you understand? He nodded. He was crying. I had not seen him cry since his father's funeral. I understand, Mom. It has been almost a year now. Marcus and Priya sold the Oakville house and bought a smaller place in Burlington, closer to me. Priya went back to full-time work. Marcus took a less glamorous job and is home in time for dinner. They come on Sundays. Priya brings a salad and does not compliment my kitchen and does not ask for anything. And that silence, that ordinary absence of asking, is the sweetest sound I have heard in a decade. Hazel comes by herself sometimes, on her bike, after school. She draws octopuses at my kitchen table. She calls me from sleepovers. She knows, with a certainty I was never able to give her mother, that the door will open. I am 69 now. I still live comfortably. I go to my book club on Thursdays. I took myself to Ireland in the spring, the trip George and I had always meant to take. I wear the good coat. I drink the good tea. And sometimes, when it is very quiet in the house, I think about that Tuesday afternoon with the annual summary from the bank and the 96 payments and the sentence at lunch that told me to live less comfortably. I have thought about that sentence a great deal. And I have come, after all this time, to a conclusion about it. It was the most expensive sentence my son ever spoke, and it was the best thing he ever did for me.